I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: are female tennis players penalised more than men? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is probably kind of obvious. It's because of the whole Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka thing that happened about a week or so back, where Naomi Osaka beats Serena Williams. There's a penalty involved in the victory, and so everyone freaks out, and this hysteria follows, where basically you've got a group of people accusing the umpire, Carlos Ramos, of sexism, and they start making this claim that women are targeted unfairly in tennis with these penalties, and that basically women are not getting away with stuff that men are allowed to get away with because there's this blatant sexism, and women are being treated differently by tennis umpires. Serena Williams herself, I'm going to read from an article here, did an interview with an Australian media show and not long after the match, and she said this: she accused the umpire of sexism because he treated her harshly and said that a man wouldn't have received the same treatment. This is Serena Williams being quoted now. "I just don't understand," she said. "If you're a female, you should be able to do even half of what a guy can do." Billie Jean King, former tennis player, weighed in and said this on Twitter: "When a woman is emotional, she's hysterical, quote unquote, and she's penalised for it. When a man does the same, he's outspoken, quote unquote, and there are no repercussions." Thank you, Serena Williams, for calling out this double standard. More voices are needed to do the same. But here's the thing. In the last couple of days, some data about tennis penalty ratios between males and females has been published, and it completely undermines this claim that Serena Williams is the victim of sexism because men get away with things that women just aren't allowed to get away with in tennis. So first of all, and I'll post a link to both of these articles below, there was an article that I read that was published by the Daily Mail and others, which just had some raw statistical data, and it looked at the differences. So here's their particular breakdown. For racket abuse, men have received 646 penalties, females just 99, so definitely weighted against men there. Audible obscenity, 344 penalties to males, 140 to females. Ball abuse, 49 penalties against males to 35 against females. Coaching violations. Now this is the interesting one because it's the only penalty stat that goes the other way, and I'll talk more about that at the end, about why possibly that might be. But 87 penalties for coaching violations against males to 152 against females. Unsportsmanlike conduct, 287 penalties against males to just 67 against females. Verbal abuse, 62 penalties against males to just 16 against females. And visible obscenity, 20 penalties against males to just 11 against females. Now, as you can see, that's clearly weighted in one direction, and it's not the direction that the die-hard fanatical supporters of Serena Williams are claiming here. There's another blog called Heavy Topspin. They're a tennis blog, and they cited some data from the Match Charting Project, and that has charted data from over 3,500 matches from around the year 2010 onwards. And they broke down the data a little differently, and what they showed was, so first of all, they break it down into all matches, then Grand Slams, and then finals, and they show you the percentages. And they actually broke it down into percentages, like what's the percentage of penalties that are levied against males versus females. And here's what they showed. So in all of those matches, the percentage of penalties levied against females was 0.69%. The percentage of penalties levelled against males was 0.95%. So more likely to be penalised if you're a male in all matches. In Grand Slams, it was 1.22% against females. For men, it's 2.56%. And in finals for women, it's 0.88%. And in men, it's 1.35%. So here's the thing. The data does not back up this claim at all. And what you've had here is this hysterical, shrieking mob, and I don't even know if there's enough of them to actually qualify as a mob. They're in enough, I guess, vocal positions or positions where they have enough spotlight on them where they can just shriek really loudly and lots of people notice them. But basically you've got this absurd claim that is being made that Serena Williams was the victim of sexism and that she's been targeted unfairly because she's a female and the men get away with this stuff. And in actual fact, the data doesn't back that up at all. So here's the thing. Carlos Ramos has had his reputation sullied and dragged through the mud by these people over the last week or so. I think it's about time that they actually stop doing that, number one. And number two, they actually apologised for targeting him in this way. Why should an umpire simply doing their job be unfairly targeted in this way? The simple facts of that tennis match itself show that he was justified in everything he did. And when you look at the actual match, you don't see a man who's out of control. You see an umpire who's doing what umpires do, making decisions. The second thing is, I think an apology is due to Naomi Osaka because her victory has been completely overshadowed. She is the one person who has not been talked about, or who has been talked about very little. She's sort of the passing thought in all of this because there's this obsession on Serena Williams and this absurd claim that she was the victim of sexism. And what's happening is that the actual victory that was won by a better tennis player, Naomi Osaka, has now been completely overshadowed and pushed into the background. It's nothing more than a plot device so that you can promote this fanciful fiction about victimization that's supposedly going on. And I think that is completely unfair to Naomi Osaka as a tennis player. Now, as I said earlier, the one interesting statistic for penalty counts that completely bucks that trend and goes the other way is the whole issue of coaching violations, which goes the other way against female players. So you're more likely to be penalised for that if you're a female. Now, one theory for why that is to make the claim, well, this is sexism. Clearly they're targeting female players here and they're ignoring the men. I don't believe that, because if there was sexism here, why would they apply it in just one penalty area? Surely you would see the count skewed in the other direction across all of those penalty areas, not just in that one particular aspect of tennis penalties. I think there's a more straightforward and simple explanation for this. If you apply Occam's razor to the scenario and ask, well, why would that be happening? Like for example, when it comes to racket abuse, I'm not surprised to see that males have 646 penalties to females who only have 99. Now, why am I not surprised by that? Because that's generally a reflection of this sort of male brute strength, and when things get competitive, how males tend to respond. Now, you compare that to the coaching violations, which generally involves a little bit more guile, and I'm not surprised to see that females, when things get competitive, try and gain it, or might try and gain an advantage by using that particular technique, whereas men go for the sheer brute force. It's literally a matter of men, with their abundance of testosterone and the physicality of the way in which we engage with the world, simply doing that, right? That's how we respond in those moments of frustration when we're trying to dominate an opponent, as opposed to females who don't have that overabundance of testosterone and that physical prowess, so they find other ways to gain advantage for themselves in the world, and females tend to be far more adept at using their guile in order to actually gain that advantage. So it's kind of not surprising that, you know, coaching really does involve a little bit more guile. It's a little bit more of a cunning way of actually trying to get yourself an advantage. And it makes sense to me that that's why things would happen that way. Now, some people have complained about that rule in the last couple of days and said, oh, it's not fair that she's getting penalised for something that her coach did. Well, in actual fact, I don't see any other way, without complicating things overly, that they could actually penalise tennis players for coaching. It seems to me that it would make most sense that the player actually is the one who's held responsible, because then what that means is that the penalty is actually tied to the match itself. It's not something separate to the match. So let's say you were just, I don't know, you levied a financial penalty against a coach or something like that. there's no real disadvantage in that match. You could actually still win a match even though there was cheating involved. It's far better that the actual match is controlled. So the match itself is actually influenced by those penalties, and they're not sort of irrelevant to the match if a player is getting an advantage. And secondly, it makes sense that you, the tennis player, are actually held accountable for what your entourage does, regardless of whether you like that or not, or you think you can make a better argument for why it shouldn't work that way. That if a person does something like the coach, they should be penalised and not the actual player. The fact is that these are the rules, and everyone knows that's what the rules are, and it's a level playing field. Naomi Osaka walks onto the court along with Serena Williams with that understanding that they're both governed by that same rule. It's not like one of them is treated differently than the other. So regardless of, as I said, of whether you can make what you think is a good argument for why they should change the way they handle that particular penalty, the fact is that currently every tennis player is governed by that rule in the same way. So there's no imbalance there at all. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.